All right, so we're going to start here with a presentation talking about business cases for IT, really focusing on, let me get the Zoom stuff out of the way here. Let's see, I'll get this right here. Oh yeah, week 3, business cases for IT. I'll go ahead and kick this off. This is really a discussion on the business cases for technology. We're going to come up with a lot of proposals, things that we want to do, as we're looking through the strategy, what we want to accomplish for the business. And then what they're really going to talk about in this presentation is really the basics of how do you get a business case together and across. When we talk about business case, what we're really talking about is a presentation or a document that outlines the justification for a project. So we're going to invest in something. Let's invest in something that's going to bring a lot of value to the company. This is going to identify the business need, the opportunity, or the problem, right, associated with it. It's going to identify the outcome of the project so that it's going to, whatever it is that's going to address that business need or problem. And then it'll present the costs of the effort. Now, usually, the value of any kind of fix that you're making or fulfilling any kind of opportunity will outweigh the cost, plus some rate of return. This is what we'd call a good business case, right? If I'm going to invest in something and I'm going to get good return back, then it's a good business case. If it's less, if you wind up costing more than the cost of doing nothing, or just holding at some specified rate of return, then that's a bad business case. So the real trick is to articulate what you want to do in such a state that when you say 3 years from now, we're going to be much better off because we made this investment, much better off than if we took that money and did something else with it. It's sort of an opportunity cost kind of situation. That's what the business case really looks to address. From a portfolio perspective, you want to think about it in terms of the fact that you have a lot of projects going on. Projects are managed holistically from an IT perspective. Resources that are applied to each project are going to typically have impact on any other project because of what we talked about in the first week, which is that there are scarce resources, right? There isn't enough money to do everything. So if you put your resources here and your people and your time and everything, that's going to be less people, money and time for other projects, and everything's going to take time. So you look at that entire group of projects and you say, all right, across these, which are most aligned to company strategy? What is the cost of each one of these? What's going to be the return to the business in terms of our strategic importance, in terms of our revenue generation? What's the overall complexity for each of these to get them complete, and how long are each of them going to take? And then within that, you kind of prioritize across that portfolio. What are the projects that we really want to make sure we're spending those resources on? Those with the best business cases, you look at those 5 areas there, they'll create the business case. Those are the ones that are going to tend to get executed. There may be a reason not to do a particular one if it has a great business case, if like there's a particular resource that's missing, or maybe you've got a resource, but the top 3 cases, the top 3 projects use the same resources, you can't do all of them. There are things like that, but in general, that's what you're going to be looking at when you decide, what to do for a business case. First step is a feasibility study. So you look at the project and you say, all right, this is a great idea, but number one, technically, can we actually do this, right? The technology exists, or at least does it exist in our environment? Economically, is it acceptable financial risk to do this? It may be a great idea and have great return, but in the short term, we just don't have the cash picture to be able to pull it off, right? And that's going to take that into account. Legal and organizational, you want to say, all right, maybe putting this social media site out there would really be great for our business. We could learn a lot about our customers, but it will be a concerted invasion of privacy. Those are the kinds of things you want to think about as well. And then behavioral. Are we going to have to do a lot of training to get this done? Is this a huge sort of culture shift for us? And if so, does that really take on the whole context of it? Is our company really the kind that's going to take this technology and run forward with it? Those are the things that you want to think about in the overall feasibility study. Is it real? Can we win? Is it worth it? So then we link IT to the relevant strategic goals. You say, all right, so if it's feasible, what's the relevant strategic goal this got? And there's 4, real areas that you can look at from a strategic perspective. Operational excellence, are we improving our margins, getting our speed to market, those things that just make us really excellent as a company. Industry leadership, is this something that's going to give us some intelligence ahead of our competitors, some speed to market capability, get products out there faster than the other guy. Customer satisfaction, is it improve our overall intimacy with the customer, or growth? Do we have some responsiveness to change that's happening both in the market and in the technology domain. So you want to make sure we strategically are we aligning with whatever our overall strategic goals for the company are, whether we're customer set focused, whether we're new product focused, or whether we're operational excellence focused. What does it match there? The fundamentals of the presentation itself. When you get into the business case, you got to make sure you're talking in terms, speaking the language of the people that will approve it. The people that approve it are typically your CFOs, your finance people. So talk about dollars, okay? You got to frame in terms of the technology and what it's going to bring to the business and what's going to change in terms of the customer experience or in terms of what your people are doing. But it needs, but the framing of the verbiage needs to be dollars focused, all right, not technology focused. Talk about the balance sheet of cost versus savings. You can guarantee success if you do this well, right? And if you don't talk about this, you're almost guaranteed to fail in the business case and get kicked back around. And the reason is because that's what they understand, and you got to talk their language. You got to talk in a way that they understand. They're making an investment that they're going to have to make some sort of a fiduciary accounting for. You have to be able to explain what the return is going to be on that investment so they can go back and sign up to what they think the forecast is going to be from a fiduciary standpoint. Tie it to actual results anytime you can. So if you know what the results are going to be, based on historical precedents of when this investment is made, this is what we see in industry, use that. It builds or destroys long-term credibility of IS if you do it well, okay? And then from here, you're including, of course, the feasibility study that you did in your prior one to show that this is actually viable. The return on investment is a tricky one to get at, especially in IT. There's a couple of ways to do it. One is net present value, and that's dollars focused. And what net present value does is it basically says, I'm going to have a cost and a return if I invest in this. And it's always an upfront cost, right? Because you're paying to get it put in. So there'll always be some upfront cost. And then the return is going to be, but over second year, third year, fourth year, I'm going to get increases in sales of this much, and this much, or I'm going to have increased savings of this much, and this much. And you subtract the positive, you subtract the cost from the savings or the return to get what the change is over time. And then that change over time, you run it against a discount rate, which is essentially like your interest rate, which is pretty small these days, to see, well, if given all that over time, what is the actual value of this investment today? So it may cost me $100,000 to implement this, but if I'm getting millions of dollars worth of return, the actual value is millions of dollars. So that's a good business case. That's what NPV does. And there's a computation for it in Excel that we can go over. Internal rate of return, sort of similar, but it says basically how long will it take for this investment to pay itself off? A lot of companies use that because they'll just have a standard IRR of 3 years. Look, it pays off in 3 years, go ahead and do it, it's low risk. Try to stay on the conservative side because you don't want to go out there. We generally tend to, in technology, we tend to assume everything's going to go well. It generally never does. So stay on the conservative side so that even if you're making a business case, even if things go wrong, during the implementation, you're still going to be safe that you made a good investment, right? And include all the costs. Make sure you're getting everything, not there are overhead costs that might not be covered. Otherwise, someone else is going to bring it up, and then you're like, well, I don't know. I didn't think about that. You don't want to be in that position. Make sure you include all the costs. You get one shot to do it right. If you get a bunch of holes shot through the case, then you're going to have to come back potentially another year later, and that's no good. When you're thinking about all the costs, use the concept of total cost of ownership. So this is the area where you look at when you're doing an implementation, you don't just think about the software license you buy or the hours that you're going to have to spend with people building it. You're thinking about how much of the overhead is this actually taking up, right? If I'm bringing developers on, where are they going to sit? What hardware are they going to use to do their development? What licenses am I having to pay to keep my developers moving? If I had to sustain this over time, will it be additional servers in my data center or more space, more heating and cooling in the data center? If you're doing, you have to bump up the cloud rentals and all those kinds of things. Those are things you want to think through everything and say, all right, in total, by doing this functionality, we're going to add this amount of cost into our business operating procedure. This is about IT really being responsive to the costs of IT and services for the business and really owning that part of it. There's nothing that's overhead. You own that part of the cost. So lay all that stuff out within your total cost of ownership. We talked about the rate of return. Chargeback is an interesting one too. Chargeback is an interesting way where, from an IT perspective, you can look at an investment and say, I'm going to assign the cost back to the users. So if you have multiple departments, you can approach it from the sense that the ones that are most interested in the project can pay for it. So this is sort of a model of IS as a consulting firm, where various business units will actually pay for IT services provided. Whereas usually a company will have a certain amount of expense allocated for information technology and information services. In a chargeback model, you just make yourself available as a resource, and you charge different departments as they use that resource. So if they make a certain number of help desk calls, they get charged for that number of help desk calls. They get a certain number of desk side support, they get charged for that support. If there are particular applications they want installed or capabilities, they pay out of their department into those. It's a very responsive way to do it, and from a customer satisfaction and an internal satisfaction standpoint, it's a very effective way to do it. If you have a distributed, diverse company like a healthcare organization where you've got multiple hospitals, clinics all over the place, this is a very effective way to do it. If you have a consolidated, centralized business that's making some big strategic moves, it's not the best model to use because each department may have a different idea of what their particular role or what they need. So you got to be smart about it, but depending on the business, it may be a very effective way to organize your portfolio and to charge back the cost of IT. And to do that, then you have to be able to establish business cases that are particular to that department. Finally, get to acceptance. You know, what you want to look at and say, if we want to take this, what's going to take to actually get this thing accepted? Is the data within your business case credible? Does it map to the current goals and objectives? Is it on the roadmap of things that we want to do technology-wise anyway? You know, do you have the money to make the investment? Is that ROI, that internal rate of return that we just talked about, is that acceptable for the business? And then for profit-based, does it meet our margin threshold? So if we're doing something that's going to actually bring new services in, are they bringing the kind of services that we want? Are they low margin services? Are they high margin services? Where is the fit that we need to make sure our technology is fitting to? Have we brought the key leaders along with us along this development? So the key about acceptance, and this is sort of counterintuitive, but you've got to get these questions answered up front by the people who will be answering these questions in the end. So think about what they need, ask them what they need in order to say yes, and then you build the case to meet each one of these things. And if you can't get it there, you already know it's going to be a no. There's no more point in wasting your time. So build to yes for all of these, so that by the time you actually make your presentation of the business case, no one's surprised. Everyone knows what the project is. Everyone knows what you're trying to do. And you just get the yes and you move forward and you start to execute. When you come to the point of making a recommendation, what you've got to do is find a continuing sponsor, okay? So typically having IS, the IS department run this is acceptable, but what you really want is to have somebody outside of IS who owns this. Preferably the person that, if it's a system that's going to be in their particular department, that they're the champion of it, right? So you want your non-IS executive sponsor, and then you make a business case for each recommendation within it. So not all maybe aspects of a project may be accepted, okay? If you've got multiple recommendations for what we do with IT, you've got a sponsor for each of those, and you just make those recommendations and we'll see which ones fall out. But what you want to do is, even though not all the business cases may be agreed to, because obviously there's funding limitations, at least folks will understand. They'll give a view. It'll give a view as to what's being done through the prism of the business strategies and what's available out there, where we can make changes to move the business forward, where we can make those investments that we think will make the biggest difference. And even if something gets pushed off then to later because there isn't resources for it, execs have an idea of what other important efforts are out there that aren't being addressed right now. And if the position changes down the road for whatever reason, they kind of know that IS is out there looking after these things. And you got their best interest in mind. We're going to be able to do some great things. Take that, then whatever gets approved, you put into your implementation roadmap, your idea of the scope, timing of all the effort, and then you put it all together in this portfolio of projects, and you present it as one project supporting the overall business strategies. And that's where you get to in terms of, that's how the business cases then will generate the portfolio of projects that you want to go do. There are a lot of lessons that you want to take into this that we've learned over time. Leadership means introducing beneficial change. So you've got to be out there innovating. They look to IS to be innovating. So get out there in front, show them how you can be helpful and how we can move the business forward in the ways that we'll talk about in the competitive advantage video a little bit. People support best what they help to build. So like I said, get people involved early on. Get your non-IS people involved early on in the business case. Help them decide whether it's good or not. Let them tell you whether it's good or not, and then shape what's valuable. They have a lot to offer. If it's their business, they need to be telling you what's important to them, and you need to learn, okay, and listen to that. Always give direct answers to simple questions. Avoid technical jargon in any kind of business case. It doesn't get you anywhere. It makes you feel good because it's what you're used to. But if it puts people off or makes people unease, gives people unease who aren't in IS, then we don't want to use it. We have to use that business acumen. Talk in terms of dollars, talk in terms of language that they understand. Lasting change and the ability to execute on these changes is going to come from this awareness, from leading, showing them how we can innovate, bringing them along, trying some things out, adapting to changes as they come, and adopting the practices of the business, making sure that everyone knows kind of what's going on, how we're supporting the business. IT can be a powerful marketing ally for the business, okay? And it must be a powerful ally for the businesses it supports in order to move that business forward.